So yeah, honestly, I want to start off with a big thanks to everybody at MGS for having us and for keeping conference track alive during the pandemic. I think you guys have done a great job of adapting quickly and moving everything online. Of course, the virtual format doesn't quite replace the real thing, mostly just because there's no open bar, but at least we still get the opportunity to connect with industry colleagues and share some knowledge. So let's do just that today. We have some awesome panelists lined up for you guys, and we're going to be sharing some insights on how to improve LTV. Specifically, we're going to try to deep dive in A/B testing, modeling, the economy, live ops, but we'll see how much time that we have to cover all those topics. They are pretty dense, and it is a short panel. We have 20 minutes, and I think there are 5 minutes reserved at the end for questions. So let's jump right into it. Let's start with some introductions. Josh, maybe you want to go first. Tell us a little bit about WildCard and what you do there.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Josh. I've been in mobile games for almost 10 years now. I'm COO at WildCard Games. We're all about reimagining classic card and board games for mobile. Our flagship game is Ultimate Cribbage. It's a really fun, puzzly card game. My responsibilities are as product owner of all games from ideation through live ops, including user acquisition, ad monetization, A/B testing, feature prioritization, ideation, etc. And then a growing responsibility for me as well is hiring. We're trying to grow our team very intentionally, and we're looking for exceptionally talented leaders to help join WildCard right now. So full stack engineers, designers, analysts, UA leads, anything.
Awesome. If you guys want to apply, speak to Josh after. Sash, why don't you introduce Mino Games and tell us a little bit about what you do there too?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sash. I'm CEO of Mino Games. That happened kind of recently. Previously, my co-founder Josh was CEO. We've been around for going on 10 years. We went through YC in 2011. Actually, I think we maybe a little bit different from you here, Josh, in that we were very heavily venture backed. We've raised over 8 million. And we've been also heavily marketing backed. We have a relationship with Tilting Point where we have a marketing deal for 30 million. We've done 3 big titles: Mino Monsters 1, Mino Monsters 2, and Cat Game. All 3 of which have gotten over 15 million downloads and done pretty well. We've been able to run profitable marketing on all of them. So they're not like a huge outside success. It's not a play ticker, but it's done well for us. And my responsibility, it's been all over the place. Very similar to you, Josh. I've been deeply involved in product, been involved in marketing, analytics. I did a lot of the programming early on. There's the kind of jack of all trades, been all over the place. So it's, yeah.
Very cool. Thank you, Sasha. I realized I forgot to introduce myself actually. So hi, everyone. My name is Eugene Joannides. I'm the co-founder and COO of Mistplay. We're the first official loyalty program for mobile gamers. So what exactly does that mean? So the way it works is, as a user, we recommend you games in the Mistplay app, and then you earn loyalty points for every $1 that you spend in those games. And then you can exchange your points for cool rewards in our shop. So the more you spend, the more you earn. So it works a lot like your credit card program, the points program with your credit card, or travel rewards program, but we're focused on mobile games. And at Mistplay, I run 4 core teams: the growth team, the sales team, the HR team, and the community team, with most of my focus being on top line revenue growth. So with the intros out of the way, let's get started. And let's grab the bull by the horns and address the question of how do you improve LTV? So I'll open it up to both of you guys. How do you improve LTV? And what I mean maybe more specifically is, what are some of the lessons that you guys have learned over the years? What are some things that you were doing maybe in the early days that you're no longer doing, or some things that you're doing now that you didn't know about before? How has your focus changed over the years?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sasha, do you want to just start with me by talking maybe the components of LTV and why it's difficult to track, and then we can kind of talk into problem solving about like how we solve that?
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. And I think we're a little different, so maybe you go first and we'll compare and contrast.
That would be really interesting. So my best description for LTV at a super high level is like ARPDAU, or revenue per day the player plays, times days active or retention. So like revenue per day times days played. It's a good theoretical construct. I also kind of like starting from there because it has no application to the real world. When changes are made to the game, it has lots of unforeseen side effects. And there are tons of things you can do that call out problems where, like, you might have something that explodes ARPDAU and it makes retention look really, really good until 3 weeks into the game and it's a train wreck. So that's why I like to think about LTV as this big, beautiful ARPU curve that floats off into the horizon forever. What about you?
Yeah. So, I mean, pretty much the same thing. I'll draw, maybe I'll just dive right into changing it, because I think it's deceptively simple. You're right, especially like you're measuring ROAS. You're like, hey, I've got my curve. Like, it's gonna all be nice, and then as soon as you want to start to improve it, things just go absolutely mental, like you've probably seen. And so you have this nice little model, but it just does not pan out into the real world at all. And I think the closest analogy that I can make is to systems theory. Games are these insanely complicated systems with dozens of different levers, and oftentimes you'll make a change, and depending on how you're viewing your LTV, because you can't measure LTV, right? You can't run an A/B test and then look at day 360 ARPU. It's just, you can't run a test for a year, and even if you did, it's probably not statistically significant. So whenever you're trying to improve LTV, you have to take a particular lens as essentially a proxy for your success. So maybe that's an interesting point to start, which is like, what lenses do we use to measure our LTV when we're making changes? Because like you just said, ARPDAU can be very deceptive. I mean, just at a very, and I think it maybe is the most common one, people will measure ARPDAU, but at the most basic level, what you'll see is ARPDAU looks great, but you've hurt retention. So if you, like, let's say you have 100 users and then you just kill retention, and so you have one user going forward, and that user spends like $100 a day, you've got great ARPDAU. So ARPDAU doesn't take into account like retention. So maybe I'll just put it back on you, Josh. Like, how do you, what lens do you use to, when you're trying to measure the changes you've made to your ARPU?
Yeah. Ooh, big question. So I'll start with some scoping. So we believe that most of our lifetime user base has not yet installed the game. So a lot of our focus is on maximizing the LTV for players that have not yet installed, which is a little bit different than maximizing LTV for players that have been in the game for 6 months, because they already have some system that they're used to in their head. From my point of view, with new players, you can do tons of weird and wonderful things, and it's basically fine. So what we look at is D30 ARPU growth from install. And the reason we do that is a lot of it's scar tissue, to be honest. Frankly, the best way I've found to maximize your ARPDAU or your D1 ARPU or things like that is usually to nuke your LTV. I mean, if you think about it, like, so we're ad monetized. The best way to boost my ARPDAU is to show ads every couple of seconds. If you're IAP monetized, it's to show some really, really, really compelling offer really early in the game that gives you crazy progress straight away. But the question is, you're keeping a player for 6 months to a year. How does it back out over time? And so we've run lots of experiments and seen time and time again that we've made changes to the game that are really positive for D1, D3, even D7, that by D30, they're pushing players away from the game, either because it's too many ads, too much friction, or the progress feels fun, so they stick around early on, but then they run out of things to progress through and they're just tired, so it doesn't bake out as well over time. So we really focus on D30 ARPU, D30 ARPU growth. The downside of that, though, which I will acknowledge, is it means the A/B tests require tens of thousands of users and many, many weeks. And the analogy that we use internally is you're kind of just filling up this bus with users and just seeing how far the bus goes. And you're just kind of walking away and seeing what it does, because maybe even right now in our game, we have something like 6 or 7 active A/B tests. So we're thinking about ideas to test before other tests have resolved. So it requires a degree of patience and discipline. So that's how we handle it. So what do you use? What's your North Star metric?
If I can interject, guys, I think you guys are both touching on a really interesting challenge that I think a lot of developers are facing, and that's around the predictive modeling of A/B testing. Because when you're A/B testing things, you're creating things for the first time, and you don't necessarily know how things are going to back out, on day 365. So I think that's a pretty big challenge. How do you guys deal with that? How do you guys model that out?
Yeah, so I think this is, certainly just testing new users is one way. In the cat game, we have a pretty old user base now, and to your point, the North Star metric, the way we generate most of our revenue, and this is probably true for most games who have been around for more than 6 months, is our elder users, people who have been around for over 6 months. And you can't run new user tests on those guys, but really the same principles apply, which is that let's say I gave them a sale, and that sale was the best thing they'd ever seen. I'm sure I'd get great ARPDAU that day, but there would be a hangover from that sale because then they'd have a ton of currency and wouldn't be able to sync it through. And so again, you have to not only test these guys on a long horizon and measure these tests over a long period of time, but you also just have to look at all of the metrics. So to your point, Eugene, I think the way that we've found works is two things. One is the new user testing, and the other is testing things as part of as an event. So I'll give you guys a quick example. We did a loyalty program where it's like every time you make a purchase, you get a cat, and players love that. But one of the problems is that if we were to roll that out immediately, in fact, A/B testing something like that is so funny because users that didn't have it hated us. We got so many customer complaints. They're like, give us this loyalty program. We want to spend money. But really what the issue would have been is if we'd rolled that out to 100 or to, I guess, 50% of users, you don't get those iterations, which is so key to making sure your tests work. And so you have, if you want to iterate on your tests without, and these are players who you don't have that many of them, you're veteran players and you don't want to fuck with them. So in order to make sure that you don't, let's say the next test, we wanted to increase the pricing, they would hate us. So the solution here is events. You kind of run as a week-long event, and users now have understood, presumably through your game, but through the industry, that these events are one-off and they're subject to change. And you can be very specific in how you target those events. So, sometimes when we're rolling out a test where we think it might have particular impact on our user base, we'll test in non-US territory, or we'll target a particular section of users. And so the nice thing about this approach is that you can do multiple iterations without sort of harming the test or harming the users by making them perceive ill, or just changing the numbers underneath them. And then it makes it a little bit easier to model, right? Because you can then build those events into your model. It really depends when you finally integrate it and on what schedule you integrate it. But it means, all right, so we're going to start running these events, and we expect to see a certain percentage ARPDAU lift for all users, and no day-over-day retention drop for all users. And so during these times, we can see that lift. So for us, that's really helped, this kind of like event structure. Yeah.
That's really
Josh, do you have a
interesting.
different approach?
Yeah, because my game's a baby and it's still growing, and most of our users are in front of us. So when I think about it from a higher level points of view, I think about like who is the creator of this ARPU or LTV curve, and who is the customer of it. And for me, product and the feature teams are growing and defining and building this thing out, because they're the ones making the game experience that causes the effects to it, the monetization to occur. And the UA people, the UA team are those users, because they want to know, like, is $5 good for this or bad? Should I be paying more or less? Should I scale it? Should I back away? And I think there's a lot of communication need there. So I think it's really important to have a good idea of what that ARPU curve might be. And the reason I use might be is it's scar tissue again. It does change. I think it's important to understand that the second you add a major new feature to your game, all your previous models and all your previous A/B tests are no longer totally valid. I've tested something before, done 6 months of development effort, then tested it again after 6 months of features, and gotten different results and different winners because the fundamental experience has changed. And it's the same thing with the curve, the ARPU curve. One thing that I think is hard being a marketer is running UA is you're taking this user, and this is the second part, is that ARPU curve is backwards looking. There's no way to project what's going to happen with new users when they install. Fundamentally, when you buy and install, you're handing it off to the product team and saying, please take good care of this guy. You know, what features are you going to build over the next 6 months? That's going to impact that player's ARPU curve. Those events that he's working on are going to impact the ARPU curve. Go ahead.
Go for it, Josh. I don't want to cut you off.
Oh, so one thing that I've learned is really, really important is having the product team set clear ARPU growth goals and LTV growth goals, and trying to communicate how that's going to be affected. For instance, one thing that we're doing right now is a lot of interstitial ad frequency tests, and we're communicating back to UA, hey, this might mean D1 comes in super, super hot. Basically, we're going to test showing more ads early.
Try not to scale up too much.
Yeah, if D1 ROAS doubles, please don't 10x our spend. Please watch it bake out to D7 14. And it's more of that kind of that feedback loop that's really, really powerful. And then there's the other direction as well, where the product team is ultimately taking care of the users that the UA team brings them. Actually, product placement from Mistplay, super fantastic source of new users, but also really different. I was shocked when we first started having players come in and they spent straight away. And their curve is much more immediate because they're coming in because they're being told, when I play this game, I'm making money. So your payback time is super, super fast. But if your day 1 or day 7 ARPU is, let's say, 3x another source, it doesn't mean the LTV will be. And understanding that difference, and then is it a $25 value optimized user? Is that's the kind of campaign that's scaling on your platform, on your game? Because if it is, you want to do a lot of purchase and whale events and building in high price features. If you're scaling on Android pre-installs or incentivized traffic, well, I want to know that as a product person, because that means I should spend my next 6 months building ad features, because I'm not going to get whales from incentivized traffic. But if I'm just looking at my old LTV curve, looking at the past, I don't know that. So LTV curves are important, modeling is important, but I think the underrated thing there is the communication between the UA and the product teams.
So I think you guys have both touched on something really interesting, and thank you for the kind words. I'm glad to hear that it's working out in this play. But I think something that is probably top of mind for a lot of developers is sort of the decision-making process around introducing new features to the game. I think you said it well, Josh, kind of the UA team is acquiring this user and then passing it off to the product team and saying, hey, take good care of this user. And then the features that the product team builds are kind of going to dictate the performance of that user, the stickiness, how much they're going to spend. So when it comes to making feature decisions, like which features are we going to introduce into the game, at what point or how big a consideration is monetization or the impact that that feature will have on the economy? Are you guys thinking about it like, okay, let's improve the economy. So what features can we build that will do that, that we think will do that? Or, hey, let's build some really cool features, and then afterwards, as an afterthought, monetization and the impact to the economy then comes in. What's the decision-making process there for you guys?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And it's something that I've changed my mind on over time. I think the way that I look at it, the way that I looked at it before was kind of like you have to build a game which monetizes really well. And there's some golden core mechanic that people will just spend a bunch of money on. And I don't think that's true at all. I think that if you look at like across the industry, you kind of have this pyramid of features and mechanics. At the base, you have the core mechanics, which is kind of like the core loop, the metagame, and the economy. And that may have zero monetization in it at all. I mean, occasionally it's got like some speed ups or something like that, but that was like really the 1.0 free-to-play games where it's like, hey, you can speed this thing up in Farmville, right? But now we see a lot of games that really just don't have those kind of friction points, or at least that's not really the key driver monetization. And instead, they have these two other layers on top of it, which is sales and live ops. And you can have a game that doesn't monetize at all in the core and then have excellent world-class sales and live ops. And if you have those two things nailed, your game's going to monetize extremely well. And then once you have that foundation of a great core loop and great game, and then those sales and live ops, then you start to basically take a bunch of bets in terms of trying to improve your game based on what you know about your players and what you've seen work, with bold new features or bold new live op events. And so, I mean, there's like so for us, I think the one really key learning here is that before you can even start to focus on monetization, you have to make sure that you have a really, really tight like core game loop and economy. Like it's kind of like if you were to go into, I don't know, Amazon and you're expecting to sell some stuff and there's just no demand at all, right? Like there's no demand for your product. No one wants it. Don't bother marketing it, right? Don't play around with the pricing. Don't put a sale on it. Just no one wants to buy your like weird thing that you put up. And so to begin with, you have to have this core mechanics which create the demand. And a big part of that is the economy. It's like if players just over time get millions of coins in your game and only spend a couple of thousand every day, well, they're not going to buy coins. Like it's just, there's no way, right? So it doesn't matter how good the sale is. If they have enough coins, they're not going to buy anymore. And so well, I guess all this to say is we had this really crazy experience in Cat Game where it wasn't always that we were running very aggressive A/B tests. We started out just kind of layering in all these features, and early on we saw these huge jumps in ARPDAU. It was like, we 10x'd our ARPDAU during soft launch. But now some of the A/B tests we're doing is just clawing back some of the features we added in because the economy got out of control. And so we'll do stuff where we like take out a feature and we'll see like a 30% improvement in early ARPDAU, right? and a
little bit counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's totally counterintuitive. Like that's what most people think is that, yeah, this mechanic has like a little sales thing in it, so I'm going to make more money. But actually, it's part of a bigger system, and it's extremely important how you monitor your economy. I'll give a really funny anecdote, and then I'll pass it off to Josh, which is one of the first really serious tests we ran was we took out global chat. And we took out global chat because, I mean, our communities a little bit crazy. We had some drama going on, and it was also just like difficult to monitor. Anyway, we kind of were like, okay, retention's probably going to drop, right? Well, we'll just eat it. And we took it out, and early opt-out like doubled almost. It was crazy. And then we saw like retention improve and everything started improving. And we're like, what's going on? And so we ran this test, and we looked at all the metrics. And what we found was that by taking out global chat, people weren't going into the chat, which meant they didn't have access to this like little exploit, which could mean they could get into clubs before level 10. And if they got into clubs before level 10, then they could trade with other people. And by trading with other people, they would ruin their early economy. By ruining the early economy, the game wouldn't be as fun because it would just be on God mode and they wouldn't buy anything. And so it's like this, I mean, you need pretty sophisticated A/B testing solutions to be able to make that causal chain. But it was this fascinating thing where we were like, oh my God, we totally ruined the economy when we added in this trading feature. And so anyway, I guess my main point here is like, create the core, make sure the core is solid, make sure it's really tight, make sure there's no leaks in your economy, that it's really fun, that retention's good. Then you can almost certainly build on really great live ops and really great sales, no matter what the game is, just using the industry best practices. And so I look at monetization as slightly different to the core mechanics. It's like live ops feature development and sales feature development.
That was an amazing story. I have a similar one. I just did this, so it's a little raw. But we launched a weekend tournament feature, and we always, our discipline is that we always wait till D30 to make sure that the feature is baking out properly. But this feature, it was so immediately obvious it was working really great that after like 2 weekends, we just rolled it out. And similar problem to you, unforeseen economy changes. One of the things we did to make sure that we were happy with rolling it out was we were looking at, how many coins did players source versus how much they sank playing. And we looked at it and it was great because they were sinking way more than they sourced from the feature. The first time and the second time they played, the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, they were sourcing way more than they sank. And it was clear by about D20, D21, that was starting to happen. So we could have made that one little hot fix before we rolled it out. But now everyone's seen those rewards. So it's really hard to change them and it's just painful. And we have to find creative solutions to fix that now.
Yeah.
So yeah.
There's events.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, also be humble, expect unforeseen consequences. You can't predict even, the D30 impact of a test.
Totally.
But jumping back to the actual question, which is like, how do you decide what features to take on? I think early mistakes that I've made has always been chasing big flashy features. And as somebody who's not quite as technical as some others, sometimes that means big flashy features that have mountains of dev effort required, which may yield actually a bad ROI for the game. And one thing that we've kind of moved to over the last year is this concept of LTV versus effort. And we literally, in the same way that a dev team will create like roughly how many days of effort or weeks, whatever your system is of effort, the product team is responsible for creating a similar thing for LTV impacts. And we can literally come out of that with an LTV impact per day of effort and see how attractive a feature is. It's kind of anxiety inducing at first because I just went from saying estimating LTV is impossible to let's guess and use that for decision making. So there's an inherent problem there, but same with dev time estimates. Those are wrong all the time too. The idea is that we're trying to make better decisions on average, and look for lots of medium and small features to work on so that we have lots and lots of shots on goal. That's been really, really effective for us. Another thing that we've done to kind of close that loop is we've exposed the North Star metric, which is D30 ARPU growth for us, to the team. And we actually set D30, quarterly D30 ARPU growth goals at the game level. So the whole team is actually held accountable based on that. And that's their team goal. That's really, really helpful for two reasons. First of all, it gets buy-in on chasing LTV growth, which is big. And second, once you get better at predicting that and being more consistent, the UA team starts to know, hey, I can pay $3 for this user now. The team's predicting 30% ARPU growth. That means I should roughly expect by the end of the quarter, I can pay, what, $3.90, something like that. And that's a helpful frame to look at it. It also helps them understand, why is it growing? What are the features it's going to grow in ad monetization or IP monetization? And it can help them understand where to test new investments and where to try scaling. So that's how we've kind of started to approach it over time.
That's awesome. I just want to do a quick time check because I know that we're already 33 minutes into our 20-minute panel. So Casey, I'm not sure if you're still here, but are we good on time? Do we have some?
Yeah, so we can go for about 15 more minutes. Okay. We have an hour. This is basically the lunch break. We have an hour-long lunch break, so we can go for a little bit longer if you'd like, and still have time for lunch.
I guess that means the panel's interesting, so let's keep it up.
Cool.
Absolutely. We do also have a couple questions if you do want to answer any questions right now.
Sure. Yeah, let's take a couple. I got a few more questions as well, so let us know how long we can go, but let's maybe try to address some questions from the audience.
Awesome. So we do have one question from Allison, and she's asking, you guys did mention a bit about, key tests, features that you had done for better or worse, but she's asking if you have a story of a test you were sure was going to be wildly successful, but turned out to be a disaster. And why did you think it would be awesome? And in hindsight, what actually made it fail?
So many.
That's like 70% of my tests. You know what I mean? Like I'm always coming in with the test being like, this thing is gonna be the one. I get way too excited, and it's usually always negative.
Yeah, I was joking with Sasha before the panel where one thing we've done at WildCard is starting to try to find if there's a way we can add an anti-test to whatever we're testing. So for example, if you're going to test adding more goals to your goal list, maybe test drastically reduce the number of goals because you might be totally wrong about your user base. And frankly, those actually do win a lot. And they're actually my favorite learnings because they're still wins because you get progress for your game, but also you found out that you were wrong about how your players work. And that can be really interesting insight or in creating insights for the future. One test
you get to update your mental model of your game.
Yeah, one example I have in my head.
I was just going to ask for an example. You have an anti-test.
One anti-test was like literally just reducing the number of goals. Another one we've run before is we've tried dramatically increasing the number of ads shown. What if we decrease it? Or what if we take away some system-initiated ad placements? What happens if we decrease it and do the opposite? But one test that sticks in my mind the most about being dead sure it was going to work and not including an anti-test, I still can't quite think of a good anti-test for this one, but it was a piggy bank feature. I had never seen a piggy bank that had failed and it was not working well in a game before, but I've made 2 of them. So we were convinced it was going to be super ARPU positive, and we comped a top 5 grossing games flow. We did it exactly. It was super juicy and delicious feeling. It was really great, and it felt like it was extra special. And it was immediately LTV negative. It wasn't just that like It wasn't just that it didn't sell. It was that it actively reduced LTV by like almost an order of magnitude more than the revenue was for that sale. And we got feedback from players and found that there was some friction points. You know, our game is about 75–80% ad monetized, so maybe having it in your face as much, you know, so it was a little too much. So we kind of refactored it, found a way to make it more subtle, but then still be apparent when it was important, when there was a really good time to buy. And we tested it again, and we basically succeeded in making it less horrible. So we spent tons of users just chasing this idea, and it just didn't work. But I'm happy we tested it because no one in the whole company thought there was any chance of it failing, and it failed twice.
Excellent,
Yeah.
excellent.
On that front, so we went through this kind of crazy development process. I think it's only recently that we've become extremely disciplined with A/B testing. So we were kind of like wild west from the beginning. We were just like, and we were really good at it actually. We shipped a ton of features and got a bunch of opt-out. It ended up burning us, but early on there was all these features that we shipped. And so maybe to answer that question, I can just talk about some of the things that we shipped that we thought were great, and then now we're testing and we're terrible. Most of it was impacting the economy. So it's like anytime we introduced a source of coins, that ended up being really negative. So no matter how, even if the feature was more fun, it was kind of worse, because then they would just use that instead of spending. I had another test that I ran recently where I thought making the game a lot easier would push people's progression through to the harder levels. But as soon as I kind of just tweaked a couple of values and made the game a little more playable, so it was less pinchy, and retention dropped, monetization dropped, everything dropped. And that was an anti-test we ran. Like after that, we're now actually in the process of testing the opposite, where we made everything harder. And it's one of those tests where you're like, why? Like, I thought it'd be more fun to make things easier, but I guess it turns out, you know, when you play Age of Empires and you type in Big Daddy a bunch of times and then you just go destroy the base, and that's fun for like 10 minutes. And then you're like, well, I don't know, that's kind of it. I think that's kind of what that test did. We had this one maybe isn't an anti-test, but Josh, something you said really resonated with me, which is you went and got feedback from your players. I think so far, the best test that I've run in terms of opt-out improvement was a loyalty program, which you should totally test instead of a piggy bank, where it's just like every time you buy something, you get something. And you could also use Mistplay if you don't want to implement the feature. But we got this from talking to our VIP players. Like I literally sat down, about 20 of them, and I just had this conversation with them and walked them through all my ideas. And that's what it came out of, because I was like, hey, what if we did this like $100 pack? And they would basically just like, I want to buy $5 packs. And these are people who have spent like over $10,000. I'm like, but you've spent so much money. They're like, yeah, but I want to do it in $5 increments. And so I was like, okay, what about if we do this loyalty program? And then they just went mental, you know, and they were like, when's it coming out? And like wouldn't stop bugging me. And so I think that's another really key thing is like, you know, you need to run these tests, you need to run an anti-test, but you also need to talk to your users. Almost every time I've done something great, it's been preceded by having a meaningful conversation with some of our top users.
That's great.
Fantastic. Casey, do we have another audience question?
I think that's it for the moment. I have a couple myself if you end up having time, but let's continue with what you were wanting to go on with. We still have about 10 minutes.
Okay, fantastic. So one of the things that I think we touched on a little bit here and there throughout is live ops and why it's so important. But I think there's something that's interesting here where live ops is really like it's a common thing in the gaming world, But for those people that are in the audience that are maybe not working in gaming, who have other products that are outside of gaming, what do you think are some of the lessons that they might be able to take from gaming and be able to apply into their own products when it comes specifically to live ops, running events? What do you guys think are some ways that non-gaming can take lessons from gaming when it comes to live ops?
Well, I think one way to look at free-to-play gaming, which is definitely true, and I think maybe a little counterintuitive to some people, is we're basically just building an e-commerce site where we're selling a bunch of stuff and we use all of the same tactics as e-commerce sites. It's just that we've created this little world in the back end that makes people want to buy stuff from our site, right? And that's kind of getting back to that thing that I said about having the core loop, which is the little world you're making, and then your e-commerce site, which is sales and live ops. And a lot of what is run is just the same stuff that's been run in retail for a long time, you know, like sales or like new launch events or loyalty programs, Mistplay, or like a bunch of different stuff. And so this is, you know, in fact, I think the question, although it's certainly true, it applies both ways. It's like games have been meaningfully informed by some of the best sales tactics and live ops tactics from the old school retail and even modern retail online, and it also applies the other way around. And I think at the core of it, there's a couple of different principles, right? There's the principle of, you know, people just love novelty. When someone, like, it's like, I don't know, I'm sure people in the audience have been obsessed with like Pokemon or something. I'm just gonna take Pokemon as an example, right? Imagine how quickly Pokemon would have died if they just never released any new Pokemon, right? Or didn't have any different versions. That's like the OG live ops. It's just like adding more content to keep people's interest. But what's happened is if you moved away from versions on consoles, you can do it on a shorter and shorter cycle. So a lot of our players, like, we introduce cats every week. You know, we have at least one set of 7 cats that are introduced on a weekly basis, and people just eat it up, and they get so excited about the next thing that's going to come out, even though it's not necessarily like any different in terms of gameplay. They're just so excited to collect the next thing. So that's one thing, is like this aspect of novelty. And that's the same as like introducing new products, which Zara in retail, for example, became one of the most valuable companies by simply shortening the cycle at which they introduced new products. So that's novelty is certainly one thing. I'd say there's a whole bunch of sales tactics that you can apply, whether it's literally just sales. We talked about the piggy bank, we've talked about loyalty program. There's a whole wealth of sales tactics which have been used across the board in gaming, but also in retail. And then lastly, there's, I'd say, this aspect of community, which is really important to live ops, where you know, you create a community and you get people talking about it, and that shared experience. It's the same way like with Pokemon, or if there's a sale somewhere, like people love to have someone to do this with and experience this novelty or take advantage of this opportunity with. So I guess my answer is like maybe a little bit long, but yeah, absolutely. Almost every product can learn from this, the same way that games learned from old school retailers and online retailers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting the way that you frame that as well, where, you know, games actually borrowed these concepts from old school retail. That, you know, they didn't reinvent the wheel or anything. There are these systems tried and true. Loyalty programs have been around for a long time. In the introduction of new content, you're right, people love novelty. And yeah, I think it paints the picture very well when you said, imagine Pokemon had just never released a new Pokemon. Yeah, Pokemon would probably not be around anymore.
And
so
yet
really,
8-year-olds know all 1,000 of them now, you know?
Yeah. Josh, do you have anything to add to that?
A little bit, maybe more of a cherry on top, but I think the novelty is absolutely critical. The Sasha kind of built up, I talked about right there. I'd also say that one of the most valuable ways to use that novelty is to build habit and to build loyalty, and finding ways to make sure that it's durable. So like a great example, what just was brought up is, hey, there's a new cat every week. That builds habit and builds loyalty. E-commerce example, I definitely got hooked a little too long on the Amazon daily deals, where it's not even that fantastic, but it's, hey, it's just in case I don't know if it's the thing that's in my cart, it's on sale, let's go check. And that's a really fantastic and powerful re-engagement hook. They're absolutely worth doing. The only maybe a little bit different thing I'd add on top is a lot of, it's really tempting to chase that top line. And I would encourage people to also consider that stacking lots of little things that are infinitely reusable can often be really, really valuable as well. Or either infinitely reusable or very cheap. And basically a factor in those production costs, and not in terms of it costs this much to make this asset, but in terms of we only have this much of that asset, whether it's an artist's time or an engineer, and look at the opportunity cost. What could they be doing? And stacking lots of those little things that are very reusable is a great way to free up your team in the future.
Fantastic, fantastic. I think that wraps it up. I think we're out of time now. Great job, guys. Really fantastic panel. I hope it was informative for everybody. Casey, I'll pass it back over to you to wrap it up. Do we just leave?
Thanks, Eugene. So quick question, there is a Mistplay table in our networking lounge. Are you guys going to be available at it for a bit after this session, perhaps?
Yeah, do you want all of us here to join it for a little bit?
If you have some time, that would be awesome. Just so that anyone who does happen to have questions that they either didn't feel like asking during this session or wanted to ask in a more direct manner can get a hold of you. And for those who aren't able to join the networking table, what's a good way to keep in touch with you?
For me, I mean, the best way is email, eugene@mistplay.com, or find me on LinkedIn, Eugene Joannides. My name is there.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you all for chatting. And I hope you have a wonderful lunchtime or whatever time it is wherever you are.
Cool.
Awesome.
Bye.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.